I think those moments really matter because they show how quickly we can form a narrative and how slowly we update that narrative we have about a person. And the biggest shift in Paris Hilton's story came much later when she spoke about her experience in the troubled teen injury. And for those of you that might not know, she was actually sent as a teenager to Provo Canyon School for behavioral correction. And that is a facility that has since faced really widespread allegations of abuse and horrific things happening in there to teenagers who I guess were probably just being teenagers. And for somebody like Paris, had undiagnosed ADHD. So now the story suddenly changes. And what's been framed as a spoiled rich girl acting out starts to look like something else entirely, right? She wasn't just rebellious, she was a survivor. And in recent years, Paris Hilton has done something really powerful. She hasn't just taken control of her story and narrative, she's expanded it. And she's become a vocal advocate for reform in the troubled teen industry, helping to push forward legislation designed to protect young people from abuse. And she also started speaking openly about something else, which was her experience with ADHD. And this is something I really love about what she said about ADHD and her experience. She said, it's not something to fix, but something to understand, something to work with. And she's talked about how her mind works differently. And being late diagnosed myself and of a similar age to Paris, that really resonates with me. When you go through your life wondering why you're a little bit different, and then suddenly somebody essentially gives you a guidebook to your brain and your emotions and your reaction, you start to see that you were in situations where your mind worked differently to everybody else's, and that was maybe seen as poor behavior or acting out or something. But in actual fact, it was our brains just functioning different. And that's one of the things I think that's really, really drawn me to Paris's later chapters. Um, she talks about how her ADHD fuels her creativity, her ability to think outside the box, to take risks, and to build things. And more recently, she launched a campaign encouraging people with ADHD to see things in a new light called Embrace Your Sparkle. Not as a limitation, but as part of who you are. And that shift really, really matters, not just for Paris, but for so many of us, because it moves hers and our story on from survival to advocacy to actually changing how more of us understand difference. And this is where, for me at least, this story becomes even more interesting because she's not just correcting the narrative for herself, and she's not just correcting it for other women with ADHD. She's actively changing it, and she's using her platform to advocate for not only reform in the troubled teen industry, not only speaking out about her own experience and testifying, but she's also kind of reclaiming those labels as well, right? Because for so long, so many women with ADHD have been labeled as too much, too scattered, too emotional, too ditzy, too blonde, too difficult, too loud, too quiet, too fidgety, too whatever. Instead of people trying to understand. And she's been involved in these conversations around more inclusive environments as well, and working with spaces that actually work for different ways of thinking rather than forcing people to fit in to a single model. So it isn't just about her anymore. She's using this platform to create space for others, and particularly people whose minds work differently. And that's a very different version of the person we were first introduced to, right? Not just a character, not just a persona, but somebody actively reshaping how we talk about trauma, identity, neurodivergence, and visibility. For years, Paris was one of the most dismissed women in popular culture. But when you look much closer, the story is much more complicated. And maybe the real reason isn't just about Paris. Maybe it's about how quickly we decide who a woman is before we understand her story, and how often we actually miss the full story because we're focused on the version of a person that's the easiest to consume, I guess. Quite often, the women we dismiss first are the ones that are quietly rewriting the narrative. And what we once dismissed as too much might actually have been a different way of thinking all along.